Hi there, everyone. Lovely to see you all. I'm Mandy Drury, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. I feel like it's a bit tough coming after Ethan with his incredibly high energy and impassioned speech. So guys, it's up to you to bring it, okay?
Yeah. We got this.
Okay, we got it. It's a little bit of a misnomer because while it is a fireside chat, there's clearly no fire, but we've got lots and lots of chat. And so I'm going to ask a number of questions, and then I'm sure lots of you here in the audience have some questions as well. So then I'll open it out to you, and then please do think while we're chatting about what kind of questions you might like to ask of Brendan and also Dooma. So just by way of introduction, I'm sure a lot of you here in the room are very familiar with what Ebbu does and what Privateer does. But just very briefly, I mean, Privateer, you're the very first PE firm to be exclusively focused on cannabis, and you're building a portfolio of global brands. And Ebbu, I mean, I was trying to work out how to describe you, and I kind of had difficulty because you're a little bit of everything. You know, a pharmaceutical company, a consumer products company, an intellectual property company, but basically, bottom line, you want to put a consistent high in a bottle. Is that a fair description of what you do?
We'll take it, although we don't really think of ourselves as a pharmaceutical company, but the rest.
Okay, got it. Okay, well, I was almost there. Okay, so let's kick it off. My first question is basically how you see your role, both of your firms, in shaping the future of the legal cannabis industry and how we can bring cannabis to mainstream acceptance. Brendan, do you want to take it away?
Sure. I'll start by saying I wouldn't be in this industry without the work of Ethan Nadelman. His work, I've been in this industry for 5 years, 5.5 years, and I think about them as dog years. I can't imagine what 20 years in this industry has been like for Ethan. I think our role is our fundamental thesis is that cannabis is a mainstream product consumed by mainstream people around the world. It doesn't matter if you're in the US, doesn't matter if you're in Europe, it's a mainstream product. Because of that, the end of prohibition is inevitable at some point, and that brands will shape the future. Mm-hmm. And so I think our role is to serve as a business can serve as a form of activism, and our role is to have conversations like this, have conversations with investors, have conversations with the media, and show that there are mainstream people in this industry, and it's not filled with people who embrace the ubiquitous cliches that you typically associate with this product.
Well, just to pick up on what you were saying about brands shaping the future of the industry, that's one of Privateer's 3 fundamental beliefs. What kind of brands, what types of brands do you think will shape the future?
I think there'll be brands just like every other industry. The days of someone walking into a retail store or a dispensary in California or Colorado or Washington or Oregon and having a bud tender put their hand into a pickle jar to grab cannabis out of it and put it into a plastic bag, those days are numbered. This product will be packaged just like all the other products that you see in stores around the world. There will be brands that focus on baby boomers. There'll be brands that focus on 40-year-old soccer moms. There'll be brands that focus on hipsters. It'll be segmented just like any other industry.
And maybe a lot of those products will have a little Ebbu inside as well, right, Dooma? So what kind of role do you see yourself taking in the future of the industry?
Well, I have to say I agree with a lot of what Brendan said. This is an industry where you can be an activist by also being a business doing things in the right way. And I'll show you guys actually at Ebbu, at the end of the year, every year we give out dog tags to our employees. And what it says is your name and the date that you joined the firm, and it says lead by example, which is our internal motto at Ebbu. So what we say, or what we believe our role in this industry is to lead by example, to create the kind of business that hopefully others will emulate, to create the kind of products that hopefully others will emulate. The product we make at Ebbu is unique. It is a distilled cannabis product. It is not an extract. It is very different from anything else in this industry, and it will change the world. And everyone says, who's your competition? And I always say, well, at the moment we don't have any, but I'm very excited for the day when we do have competition, when other people are trying to make safer and healthier products out of cannabis, and to really turn the corner and make this a product that the mainstream can handle. Because the reality is, mainstream audiences are not going to be going to dispensary anytime soon. They're not going to be, as Brendan said, sticking their hand in the pickle jar and pulling out a bud of marijuana to go home and smoke it. For cannabis to become a safer and healthier psychoactive, as it has the potential to do, it needs to change. And we, as leaders in this industry, we need to do the hard work that it takes to make a type of cannabis product that can be branded, that can be predictable, that can be reliable, and that can be on the table at every restaurant and every bar around the world.
Yeah, so in other words, instead of reaching for a bottle of wine, we might reach for something that might be a cannabis product instead. Can I go back to what you were saying about you don't really see yourselves as having competitors? Because some people might say, well, what about, for example, Dixie Elixirs? But would you see them as a potential customer instead of a competitor?
They are a customer of ours. So in fact, we do see them as a customer instead of a competitor. At Ebbu, we're focused on trying to make the kind of products that will change this industry. And we realize that we can't do everything. So there are certain types of products, such as edibles, that we don't know how to make and don't want to make. But we will sell our active ingredient, our distilled cannabis, to those folks who will use it to power their edibles. And we ask them to put a sticker on the box that says Ebbu inside, like when you buy a laptop and it says Intel inside. And so, yeah, we work with any edibles company, anyone who's making any kind of cannabis product. If they want to deliver a predictable and reliable sensation, we are the only company in the industry that can do that.
It's kind of interesting, though, that you decided to go down the adult use route, recreational, as opposed to medicinal, when there's so much investor focus on medicinal. So why did you decide to do that?
To me, and Brenda, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but to me, the path of cannabis is going to follow the path of alcohol. And if you look from the Sumerian times to the Middle Ages, one of the primary uses of alcohol was medicinal. If you had a headache, alcohol changes the way your brain processes oxygen. It can contribute to reducing your headache. If you have parasites, the alcohol may kill your parasites. If you have an infection, we know it's very effective for that. And if you look at it historically, the first medications that were made in our world were made to treat parasites, bacteria, and headaches, right? And the reason for that is because we knew the pathways. We understood how alcohol was able to treat these ailments, and that helped medicine, or science actually develop medicines to treat those particular ailments. Now, cannabis right now is a fantastic medicine, and there's tremendous benefits that a lot of patients are getting from using cannabis as medicine, but if you put yourself in a time capsule and you come back 100 years from now, you're not going to see a lot of people using marijuana to treat those ailments. What you're going to see are commercially produced synthetic medications that were created because marijuana opened the door. It allowed us to understand the endocannabinoid system. It allowed us to understand these pathways and allowed medicine or pharmaceutical companies to make better medicines to target the endocannabinoid system and to treat things like the Base syndrome, to treat a lot of the conditions that cannabis has been very effective at treating. I don't think that medicine grows in fields and grows in farms. I think that in the future it will be produced in labs just like it is today. But just how alcohol provided a roadmap for making better medication centuries ago, cannabis will provide a roadmap for making better medication in the future. But that doesn't mean that cannabis will go away. If you go to any bar, any restaurant, any hotel in the world, they're serving a lot of alcohol, and they're not trying to treat your parasites. They're doing it because alcohol is a lot of fun, and the reality is cannabis is a lot of fun too. So for that reason, we focus on the adult use side of the business because we're focused on making a product that enhances well-being and that it's a safer and healthier alternative.
I don't know, I think if you drink enough alcohol, you probably kill an awful lot of things inside your body, okay?
And some brain cells.
Yeah, but the point is well made. I mean, in terms of the health benefits of cannabis, the potential health benefits, we've barely scratched the surface. What are your thoughts on this, Brendan?
Oh, I think that just as the market will be segmented, as I discussed in my previous comment, it'll be segmented a different way from pharmaceutical to wellness to recreational, and you have companies and brands and products in all three of those segments. There are medical products currently available based on cannabis that just don't have a recreational use. Last night I was on the phone with government officials in Australia regarding a chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting study using cannabis extract that we'll supply the product for. clearly not a recreational use, clearly a very medical use. And so there'll be different products and companies across those segments as well.
And I'm glad you brought up Australia, not just because obviously that's where I'm from, but as Ethan was saying, as gradually the dominoes around the world are falling in terms of the path towards legalization, Ireland, Mexico, Australia, and elsewhere, where would you both see the biggest expansion opportunities globally? Dooma?
Well, we just came back from a trip to Europe where we're looking at setting up a facility there. Right now, there's 39 countries around the world that have legalized either medical or prescription cannabis. We distinguish between medical and prescription, meaning prescription, a doctor writes you a prescription, you pick it up at the pharmacy. Medical meaning you get it at a dispensary. There's a tremendous global market for cannabis. I think that people in the U.S. are myopically focused on the U.S. I remember being at one of these conferences and hearing someone saying, "We're gonna be the biggest dispensary chain in Rhode Island," and who gives a shit? The reality is there's a whole world out there, and I think that in terms of largest markets, surely the U.S. will probably be the largest market for cannabis, as it is the largest market for almost every product in the world. But I think if you focus exclusively on one state or even on the U.S., you're really missing the boat.
Well, what other countries would you see the biggest opportunity?
No, Canada is tremendous right now. Spain, Portugal, certain countries in Europe are interesting. It's hard to say, but I think that what you see globally outside the U.S. are a lot of very small players in the medical and prescription space. And if you add them up, the value of those small players is substantial.
And where else in the world are you looking at for privateer, Brendan?
So I would say a lot of companies in this industry maybe know the market in Denver, but perhaps not all Colorado. If they know it in Colorado, they don't necessarily know it in Colorado, Washington, California, Oregon. We pride ourselves on knowing the various regulations in all of the U.S. states, as well as Canada, Portugal, Ireland, Czech Republic, Germany. I think that Canada will be the first G8 nation to legalize recreational cannabis. You'll be able to go into a store and buy it, I think within 12 months, but likely the next 6 to 9 months. I would look at Australia and Germany in the next 9 to 12 months in terms of medical cannabis programs at a national level. Both countries moving very quickly. I just spent 3 weeks in Ireland, the UK, Czech Republic, Germany, talking to regulators and politicians there. All of those countries are moving very quickly. When we started 5.5 years ago, we toured the US and around the world looking at different programs, trying to understand the markets. And Europe today feels like the US felt 3 years ago. There's a pace, there's a velocity in Europe that is evolving very rapidly, and I think it's probably the most exciting place to look over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, Ethan was talking about some of the vulnerabilities, what potential obstacles could stand in the way of this process, and the thing that comes to mind, obviously very domestically focused, is the 2016 presidential election. So how does that factor into your forward planning for your firms? Dooma?
It's so obvious that in this issue the train has left the station and you're either on the train or on the tracks. I don't see any possible way that cannabis can be put back in the bottle. It doesn't matter who is elected. I mean, the last time, everyone hates when I say this, but it's true, the last time the federal government moved to make something that this many states had voted on illegal was slavery, and there was a war over that. And I'm not comparing marijuana to slavery, they're very different things, but if you took away the medicine from people in 26 states, if you took away the medicine from more than half of the country by population at this point, you would not get reelected. And there's not a politician out there that wants to take that chance. So I understand people like to talk about marijuana and the upcoming election as being an issue, but it's, at the worst it's going to be a road bump, and at best it could change everything.
Would you agree with that, Brendan?
I see the three main risks for us are public companies. There's about 85 public companies in this industry. Most of them are run by hucksters, and I worry about issues with them defrauding Main Street investors. That is the biggest risk we see in terms of harming the industry as a whole and pushing back the regulatory changes. The second one would be what I would probably categorize as gummy bears and cartoons. there's significant risks with some of the products around gummy bears, cookies, candies, sprayed or infused with THC, getting in the hands of children. Ethan discussed Responsible Ohio and the problems there. The biggest problem I had with that campaign, and I had a lot, the biggest problem was with the cartoon character, the superhero that they used to run that campaign. It was just a very poor choice. Thirdly, I would put government changes. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and met with 8 congressional staffs, groups or members of Congress, 2 in the House, 6 in the Senate, 7 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and all of the Republicans see this issue, see legalization taking place. They see liberalization of our cannabis laws at the national level. But even the most hardcore Republican sees this as being inevitable.
Going a little more micro with the risks, in terms of something that might be a threat to your own business at Ebbu, Dooma, what about like big pharma, big alcohol, big tobacco with billions of dollars in R&D spend breathing down your neck? How do you stay ahead of that?
Yeah, there's something that Ethan said that really resonated with me, and it's very sad that a lot of the companies in this industry have not been contributing to the legalization movement. But the reality is that even though it's the right thing to do, there's a very strong incentive for companies in this industry not to contribute to legalization and not to try and force legalization, because we have this incredible situation. It's a sort of a once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity where a small company like ours can build a global brand without any fear of competition from the bigger pharmaceutical companies, from the alcohol brands, from the tobacco brands. Those companies are legally, at least right now, prohibited from competing with a company like ours. And so, why would we give money to legalizing cannabis just so those guys could jump in and eat our lunch? It is sort of the unfortunate reality, but it is a very good situation for investors in this, to get into this industry, because again, you can invest in a company like Privateer or like Ebbu or any of the folks who are presenting today, and they can build their brands and even build to a global scale before Anheuser-Busch can jump into the game. So right now, those folks are not competitors. I think it's very likely that in 2017, we will see, or shortly thereafter, we'll see a rescheduling of cannabis from Schedule 1 to something different. And I think that will allow competition from pharmaceutical companies. But the reality is that the pharmaceutical companies aren't specifically competitors for us. We're not worried about that.
How big, Brendan, can you estimate how big you think the market could eventually be, provided that broad legalization trends continue as they are right now? Can we make an estimate on what the industry size could eventually end up being? Because it's such a high growth market, it's exploding so fast that the numbers that I see are all different. Like over the next decade, could we see double-digit percentage growth every single year?
So I have a very different view on all of that. That's not embraced mostly by the industry. We sized the industry 5 years ago at $50 billion in the U.S., and that's the illicit market, and that's the gray market. There is no fully legal market in the U.S. And we size it at $50 billion today. And we don't differentiate. We don't differentiate between the medical market, the recreational market in the U.S. $50 billion in the U.S. And about $200 billion internationally on an annual basis.
What about you, Dooma?
Alcohol is a $1 trillion industry. Tobacco is a several $100 billion industry. Same with coffee. If you look at the trends, which I think a lot of people don't pay attention to, but they're there, and if you dig in, you can find the data. Per capita consumption of tobacco has been declining since the 50s, right? Not a shocker. Per capita consumption of alcohol has been in steep decline since 1980, and during that same time, the price of a drink has gone down. And so you'd think if drinking got cheaper, and people like to drink, because we all like to drink, people would drink more. And we're seeing the opposite, right? We're seeing people drinking less. And so what that tells me is that we're seeing a migration away from the 3 legal psychoactives in our world. Even caffeine consumption per capita has been just a straight plateau since 1965. And you'd think with the energy drink boom, it would have increased. We're seeing people moving away from the 3 legal psychoactives in our world because now we're focused on our health. And cannabis provides a healthier alternative to those legal psychoactives. And I see that there's really no limit to the size of this market, but it can certainly be as big as alcohol.
And you're often quoted as saying the opportunity is bigger than the internet, bigger than the tech boom of the 2000s.
Well, I think so, because you don't need, everyone likes to compare it to the internet boom, but you don't need a computer or a tablet or a phone or a data plan or even electricity to use psychoactives. But we all need psychoactives in our lives, and we'd all like a better class of psychoactive than what we have access to.
I'm going to open out the conversation to the floor if anyone's got a question for either Brendan or Dooma. I've always got lots of questions, but I want to give you an opportunity as well to get a word in edgeways. Does anyone have a question for either Dooma or Brendan? Oh, yes, Ethan.
Let me just challenge Dooma on one thing. You said, I can't see why folks would support legalization. I think you meant to say federal legalization.
Correct.
Because the fact is, most of what we're talking about right now is about changing laws at the state level. If these things lose next year, your industry doesn't really necessarily grow. So I think the issue about federal legalization opening up for pharmaceuticals and consumer goods is right. But on the state level, that's what's opening things up now. And it's also not just why people in the industry could do it, it's also why individuals could do it separate from their actual industry.
Yeah, exactly. The issue is statewide legalization is essential for our industry. And there is a sort of perverse incentive that I wish was not there for federal legalization. I would like to see federal legalization very soon, but that would make it harder for my company to exist and harder for my company to raise funds.
The biggest issue on the federal level, or one of the biggest issues on the federal level, is banking, and I'm optimistic that will be resolved at some point in the next year. There's a number of different methods in which it will get resolved. You mentioned tobacco. I don't see them ever coming into this industry. We haven't heard anything about it. Alcohol and pharmaceutical companies are already looking at this industry. They're already doing it. All the global alcohol companies are looking at this industry. In the U.S., the local distributorships are already making investments regionally in the U.S. So it's already moving down that path, and I think ultimately they will start driving towards state-by-state legalization as well as federal legalization. Once pharmaceutical companies, the alcohol companies, and the banks start pushing for this, I think legalization will have the wind at its backs.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question for Brennan. What plans do you have that you can talk about with regard to distribution across the U.S. And particularly with regard to the laws in California being a distributor and a producer in the way that they don't allow currently the vertical integration?
Yeah, it's a challenging industry in that the regulations are extremely different state by state, country by country. Our focus for the next year it's really about, in 3 words, brands in hands, getting our brands in as many hands as possible, and that refers to Tilray as a medical cannabis brand and Marley Natural as a recreational brand. And so our focus is on a global supply chain, so moving medical cannabis around the world legally. It's very challenging, but we're doing it. So that's one project, getting Tilray in as many hands in Europe and Australia and the U.S. as possible, and then building out a distribution network in the U.S. And that involves very different models in different states. In some states it may mean vertically integrated, in other states it may mean partnering with a local firm that serves essentially as a Coca-Cola bottler or a Frito-Lay packager. And so they'll meet our standards, and they'll use our packaging, and they'll supply our products. So very different models across various U.S. states.
Frank, I know you asked Brendan, but I just want to jump in on this, just to explain that, these guys, Privateer, are doing something very difficult. They are right now attempting to become a global distributor of cannabis and really give Bedrocan, I don't know if you guys know who Bedrocan are, but they're the largest exporter of cannabis globally, a run for their money. And it is really challenging thing to do, but it is the right thing to do. And setting up sort of sales networks and distribution networks around the world and selling cannabis into all the different medical cannabis countries, open up the pathway for other companies. And Privateer taking a leading role in that, first of all, it helps the entire industry. All of us in this industry, we think of ourselves, at least I think of my company, I'm sure Brendan does as well, sort of like the icebreaker. You know, you have to have like this super thick hull because like you're just plowing through this field of ice, and like you don't know how thick any of the ice is, and any iceberg could just go straight through your hull. But the reality is once you've carved that path, the people behind you, they don't need to have a thick hull. They can just follow the path you carved. And when you're first, you have the advantage of being able to set the course. And they're really doing that in terms of international distribution, which is fantastic.
Brendan, how has your investor profile changed over the past 5 years?
So, our first round 5 years ago was a $7 million round. The most difficult round of capital raised in the last decade. I mean, it was when we were raising $7 million to invest in the cannabis industry 5 years ago, 4 years ago. People looked at us like we were crazy. We raised the $7 million. It was hard, took a long time. Last March, we closed a $75 million round. Originally we had individual high net worth individuals who invested, single family offices, multifamily offices, and now 2 institutional investors. A year ago, we announced Founders Fund, led by Peter Thiel as an investor in our second round of capital. And at the time, we said that announcement would give other smart investors permission to invest in this industry, and that while it was great for us, a rising tide lifts all ships, and it would be helpful for the entire industry, and that's been the case. We're out raising an additional round of capital. It'll be somewhere around $100 million, almost exclusively from family offices and institutions. It's just a different caliber of investor. I would say, and we've talked a lot about politics, our investors come from the far left and the far right. And they believe in this industry, and they believe in this issue for a number of reasons. None of them are making a purely financial decision. They're looking for a social return measured by ending prohibition and the harms caused by prohibition.
And for you, Dooma, your investor profile and how it's changing or has changed?
Well, earlier this year we closed our first investment from an institution, and as Brendan said, that's when things change. We have several family offices that invested in our Series A round. Our Series A round is open through the end of the year, and so it will close very soon. But we've seen, as Brendan said, when we first started raising money, you're looking at a bunch of people very motivated by a love of cannabis, and not necessarily making the smartest business decisions, because let me tell you, when we just started, it was me and my partner and a laptop, and it wasn't too much to invest in. But we've taken those funds and turned it into a real business with real revenues, and now we're seeing sort of a much higher caliber of investors who are coming on board. It is really difficult to raise money in this industry, and we are in a much more disadvantaged place than privateer, because not only do we touch the plant, which means that we are engaged in criminal activity in the eyes of the federal government, but we're also based in Colorado, where there are restrictions on people who are not 2-year residents of the state investing. And we've raised, at this point we've raised $9 million. 8.7 million of that came from people who are not 2-year residents of the state of Colorado, because I just moved there and I don't know anyone there. And it is much, much harder to raise money from folks who are not residents of Colorado in that state.
Let me thank you, Frank, and thank you, Ethan, for your questions earlier. Let me take another question from the floor. Yes.
This question's for Brendan, but you might have some thoughts too. How do you go about talking to investors who are interested in the cannabis industry, but maybe a little bit reticent to invest in all?
Yeah, good question.
This is going to sound egotistical.
Just go ahead.
But at this point, if I'm hiring an employee or I'm closing an investor, if I have to convince them to invest in this industry, that's the end of the meeting. It's just not worth my time. And that sounds, I don't want that to sound the wrong way. It's just that so many people see the opportunity. So many people see this as a career opportunity, as an investment opportunity. If I'm just not going to waste my time convincing someone that this is an industry for them to invest in.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, although not when it comes to employees. I have made strong efforts to show people that they won't go to jail if they come work for us. But typically you're either in or you're out, and you either realize the value of cannabis from the forefront or you don't. And we've had cases where you get down the road with someone and they're about to send the check, and then their grandma calls and like, you really want to do this, and then they have second thoughts. And of course, we always do have that conversation with them when that happens. It's happened many times. And typically, I say, do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Let's say that your daughter is at her first party, and they have alcohol at that party, and they have cannabis. Which would you rather that she consumes? And I've never had anyone answer that question, alcohol. And the reality is, even if you've only tried cannabis once and you've tried alcohol once, that cannabis is healthier. It's ingrained. And a lot of people are making this investment because it's a great opportunity. A lot of people are making this investment because they want to see social change. A lot of people make this investment because they're just greedy and they think this is the next internet. It doesn't matter who you are. At some level, when you bring it down to the family and you bring it down to someone they're related to, and you say, would you rather that person consume alcohol or cannabis? Everybody wants to see cannabis legalized because they want the next generation to have a choice, to have an opportunity that we never had when we were growing up. And they know that investment in Ebbu or in Privateer or in any company in this industry is a step in that direction.
I think you bring up an excellent point when you talk about grandma calling, or the example of a teenage girl going out and what would you rather than consume, is basically underlining the changing demographics of those who may eventually use cannabis products. Because, for example, I was telling my own parents in their 70s about the industry, and I was a little nervous thinking they might immediately condemn it, and the first thing they said was, how can I get a piece of this? Because they're both riddled with arthritis and various other ailments, and they're like, this is so much better than filling ourselves with chemicals from pharmaceutical companies. So, I think you raised an excellent point. Let's take another question. There was one right here. Yes, sir.
Yes, thanks. When changes to the DEA classification occurs, how do you think that's going to play out? Do you think it goes to Schedule 3, or is there just delisting?
Oh, Jesus, you asked that question.
With that?
So basically, this is the big thing, and it's really scary because we're all in New York right now. It's a medical marijuana state, right? Most of the 26 states that have legalized cannabis, well, I guess all of them have a medical program. 4 also have a retail program. Sativex and Epidiolex are 2 drugs that have real marijuana in them. They're made from marijuana, and they are going through FDA trials right now. 2017 will decide whether or not they are approved. If they are approved, you set up an imbalance, a situation where a foreign company can sell products in the U.S. pharmaceutical system or in the U.S. pharmacies, and the U.S. companies cannot compete legally. Like U.S. companies can't touch marijuana to make those products. That's not a situation that's going to persist for very long. You're clearly going to see the pharmaceutical companies in the U.S. lobbying the FDA to reschedule cannabis immediately after Sativex and Epidiolex are approved in 2017. When that happens, the next problem is that the U.S. pharmaceutical companies like, hey, maybe we should make a drug out of marijuana. These other guys are doing it. People seem to be buying it. But wait, what's my motivation to do that? Because it costs about $500 million to take the drug to market right now through the pharmaceutical system. And the consumer could just go down the street and buy effectively the same drug, or maybe they don't know the difference, but it's more or less the same thing from a dispensary if they have a medical card. So now you're going to see, in my opinion, the pharmaceutical companies, once cannabis has been rescheduled, lobbying for the FDA to get involved in regulating in some manner the medical marijuana system. And that could mean a lot of things, but if the pharmaceutical lobby is successful, they don't want to see competition from medical marijuana dispensaries, medical marijuana grows, medical marijuana products. In a worst case scenario, it could mean effectively the end of medical marijuana sales in the United States and everything moving towards a prescription system. And that would be that's something that could happen without any kind of legalization from the DEA or from the federal government or any kind of DEA involvement, right? If cannabis becomes rescheduled, the FDA would have enough oversight to get involved in the medical market. So it's very scary. That is a super pessimistic view, and I'm sure that's not going to happen. And Dr. Nadelman probably has his own opinions, but of what's going to happen. But it could happen, and any sort of less terrible option of that could still be pretty bad.
Brendan, do you have anything to add before I take the final question?
No, sure. There'll be 3 segments.
Go ahead.
There'll be medical, wellness, recreational, and different states, different countries, forget states, different countries around the world will have different models. So you have an apothecary herbal system in Europe, and there'll likely be something similar there. And here you'll have medical and recreational, probably with different regulators, but that's the most difficult question someone can ask.
Okay, so to finish on time and to make sure I'm not slapped by JJ the MC, I can only take one more question. Would someone like to be that person? No questions? In which case, oh yes, Frank.
Just a quick follow-on from Dooma and your brand, and given the fact that you can't create a product in Colorado and ship it to another state, do you plan to, or are you currently licensing formulations to distributors state by state? Or how will you move your brand across the state in the current landscape?
Look at Frank with all the questions on distribution today. I like it. So yeah, everyone, as you guys know, it's illegal to transport cannabis material between states. What everybody is doing to get around that, I suppose, is either a licensing model, where you would license the brand to an operator who is licensed in another state and somehow get revenues from that, or you would set up a facility to make a version of your product in another state. And certainly with the Marley brand that you guys are working on, sort of, I assume, some hybrid of both of those, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and so there's a couple different. Those are sort of the two choices. At Ebbu, we're really concerned about our brand and our sort of our image with consumers. And if we were to just license our brand name to some, Yahoo or Joker in another state, like who knows what they would do, and then they slap our name on it. We can't take that risk. And so we're very, very cautious about how we expand. We're really focused on expanding into California, which will be the second state that we have operations in, and we will fund at least a portion of that expansion and produce our own products in California so that we can ensure that a product you buy in California is the same quality as the product you would buy in Colorado. Now, doing that state by state is cost prohibitive. We can't operate in 26 states, or hopefully someday 50, and have a facility in each of those states. So we're really focusing on the biggest markets. And the other biggest market, as Brendan has said too, of course, is internationally, right? The 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, it's been ratified by nearly every country in the world, allows for transportation of medical cannabis between any two countries that have a medical or a prescription cannabis program. So from one international facility, we can sell to the entire rest of the world except for the United States. And that's really our focus. So we're focusing investment in locations that have the biggest payoff. And currently that's California and the rest of the world outside of the United States.
Yeah, California, I think, who was it? Ethan, who called it the Big Kahuna, right? Yeah, Big Kahuna. So final words, very quickly, either a message you would like to impart or something that we may have missed. Brendan.
Gosh.
Or goodbye is sufficient as well.
I would just say this industry is really different from anything I've ever seen before. I spent 5 years with about 3,000 venture capital-backed startups and venture capital firms, talking to CEOs and founders on a daily basis. And this is a really complicated industry, far more complicated than anything I've ever looked at. It's complicated legally, morally, socially, politically. It's complicated state by state, country by country. I would advise everyone to do as much due diligence on companies around the U.S. and around the world before making any kind of investment in this space.
Dooma, final words?
I'm just so impressed by how far this industry has come in such a short time. I got involved in January of 2014, which is like a year ago, and it's crazy. And like, never in a million years would I have thought that I would be in New York City looking at all these smart people in suits and talking about this investment opportunity, and it has happened in less than 2 years. And Brendan earlier made the analogy of dog years. Like this industry is moving faster than anything on the planet. The RQ conference, I don't know if you guys are familiar with RQ, but it's an investment organization. And when I learned about RQ, I found out that they have 5 events a year, and I'm like, that's crazy. Why would you want 5 investment conferences a year? That's so many. But actually, you need that because the industry is moving faster than you can imagine. And in that every 4 months or so, when they have a new RQ, it's like an entirely different industry. There's an entirely new group of players. This scene is exploding. So any of you who are interested in getting into this space, you need to move very quickly. The opportunities that are around now will not be around in a year from now. And the opportunities around in a year from now will not be anywhere near as good as the opportunities that are around now. The dust is going to settle, and a lot of the people who are players at the moment will not be around. But some of these companies are going to make it through, and you want to be in with them if you can.
It's a veritable green rush. Well, best of luck to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you.